It is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Good one coming up here. Lots to get to. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune joins me here in a little bit to talk Timberwolves, some offseason stuff that caught my eye. He caught up with Anthony Edwards, Timberwolves star guard, a little while ago, and thought that conversation was interesting enough that I would talk to Chris about it, just Ant's goals for the offseason, where his game can grow. And, of course, we can't talk about Anthony Edwards without talking about Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, so the discussion got into those players as well. That will be coming up, like I said, in just a few minutes. Got some Za'Darius Smith thoughts at the end and some NBA, NHL playoff thoughts at the end as well. First, though, what did I miss? It was a late one. It was already going to be a late one. Twins-Dodgers, but so many twists and turns, extra innings out on the West Coast, and just when the Twins finally solved one nemesis, at least temporarily this year, the Yankees winning that season series against New York for the first time since 2001. Again, that's such a dramatic statement to make, but since 2001, that is clearly the team that they have struggled with the most over the years. Playoffs, certainly a big part of that as well, but won that season series, feeling good about themselves when they get a problem solved, when they get an old nemesis taken care of. Two old ones, I should say, reemerge. One of them being the Dodgers. Like I said, they've now lost after losing 9-8 in extra innings in dramatic fashion on Monday night. They've now lost 11 straight times to the Dodgers. Now, those span a lot of different years because in the previous world orders of baseball, teams in different leagues wouldn't play each other all that often. Now, they will see the Dodgers once a year under the new scheduling format. Now is that turn out in L.A. So they lost again to the Dodgers, 11 in a row against the Dodgers. So that is troubling in the first place. The second place, old nemesis Phil Cuzzi, connected to the Yankees, by the way. He's their nemesis because he called that double, that should have been a double for Joe Mauer, foul back in the 2009 American League Division Series. Twins go on to lose that game, lose that series, and nobody's really forgiven Phil Cuzzi almost 14 years later. Now he's given them reasons along the way over the last 14 years to still dislike him, but his calls on Alex Kirilloff in a key situation on Monday were particularly egregious. So this was the second of two bad umpiring things the Twins had to complain about. The first actually came in regulation. This tied 6-6 late. Twins trying to hold on, they'd rallied on a long Trevor Larnach home run, and then David Peralta for the Dodgers, runner on second, 2 outs, hit a hard ground ball down the first baseline. Looked to be foul from a lot of different angles, including the home plate angle was probably the best one, but called fair by first base umpire Shane Livensparger. Called it fair, and that is not a reviewable play. So that becomes a run-scoring hit. Twins go down 7-6. Now they did, to be fair, rally in the ninth. Byron Buxton double tied the game. So the Twins did get it to extra innings, tied 7-7, and in the 10th had a glorious opportunity to bust the game open. Loaded the bases. Christian Vasquez walked with the bases loaded to give them an 8-7 lead. Still had the bases loaded, nobody out, and up 1 run already, that free runner scoring. Now, they made 1 out, and then Alex Kirilloff comes to the plate. First pitch, way outside. Looked like it was high, too. Called a strike by home plate umpire Phil Cuzzi. He of the, like I said, aforementioned 2009 botched call down the line, the left field line on Mauer's would-be double. Second pitch is a foul ball, so it's 0-2 now. Third pitch, way inside, 2-3 inches inside, called strike 3. So it's got, the Dodgers announcers are just incredulous on the play. They can't believe it. Even the Dodgers announcers, like I said, are incredulous. They can't believe that those were all called strikes. I think Awful Announcing had a recap of it. Said, boy, oh boy, Phil Cuzzi is just making being a major league hitter way harder than it already is. Hey, join the club. He's been doing it for years to the Twins. Quote, both sides of the plate were an extra 3 inches. We shall take it. I mean, that's not even close. That's impossible for a hitter. It was impossible for Alex Kirilloff, and the Twins certainly don't need any more help struggling with the bases loaded. That's been a major problem for them this season. Dodgers get out of the innings, score 1 in the 10th. Neither team scores in the 11th, and the Dodgers get the winning run on a bases-loaded walk in the 12th inning. Jorge Lopez, a 3-2 pitch, just missed. Would have been a strike probably on Alex Kirilloff, but not for Jorge Lopez. So there you have it. That was the recap of the game at Old Nemesis. Old Nemesis creeping up right when the Twins had gotten rid of the Yankees. They now have the Dodgers and Phil Cuzzi back on their ledger. Haven't beaten the Dodgers, I believe, since 2011. And again, a lot of time spanning those games, but got swept in 2014, swept in 2017, swept in 4 games, split between 2 ballparks last season, and then losing the opener here right now. So maybe they can do better in Game 2. Hopefully it'll be shorter and less controversial. Hopefully they can solve this nemesis too.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Let's welcome in Chris Hine from the Star Tribune, covers the Wolves. I gave him a little bit of a break, 2-3 weeks before I said, Chris, got to have you back on. We got to talk some Wolves. It's the hot stove NBA offseason, at least for the Timberwolves. They're not usually playing in mid-May, even though a handful of teams still are pursuing a championship. Chris wrote a piece on Anthony Edwards, and that ran in the paper over the weekend on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. It's online, startribune.com. The interview was late last week with Ant. It was just you and him, if I'm not mistaken, or was that a group? Was that a group setting?
Yep,
or just the two of you?
It was his PR people as well.
Yeah,
on the call, but just me and him chatting for about 20 minutes or so on Thursday afternoon.
What do you? I obviously I read the story. I thought it was interesting. I want to hear from you first. Because things get left on the cutting room floor, but also, there's like the tone of the interview, stuff like that. What stood out to you from what he said, kind of where his head is at right now in this offseason?
Yeah, a couple things. We covered a lot of ground in that interview. The big highlights that kind of stand out are he really wants to be the guy who's got the ball in his hands at the end of the game, taking the last shot. If he's going to have one-on-one coverage, or he's going to not be double teamed or forced to give up the ball, he's not going to want to give up the ball in the last couple of seconds. And you saw he was the person that took the last shot at the end of Game 5 against Denver. Saw that throughout the season. But he solidified himself, like he is going to take the shot in those moments. And we'll see how that works with, Karl-Anthony Towns, a guy who also wants to be the guy that takes those kind of shots and won a couple games for the Wolves in late in the season when they needed to have some. We'll see how that dynamic plays itself out as we head into next year. Ant, I think very specifically wants to improve his ability to make contested jumpers. That is something he is really striving for. One of the reasons why he wants to work with Jaden McDaniels this offseason and stay here in Minnesota for a good chunk of the offseason is to be around somebody like Jaden who's going to challenge him defensively. He's learned a lot from watching Luka Doncic in that regard, where he's like, I watch Luka and he never really panics. He never really quickens his shot. It's the same shot and he's still able to get it off. And so he's learned a little bit from guys around, just watching guys around the league who don't change their shot even if there's a bunch of defense around them. So he's trying to incorporate that into his game. He said he felt like he was doing it towards the end of last season and in the playoffs, and that's why his playoffs were as successful as they were.
Definitely seems like, this is not a surprise, but just from reading that and just kind of examining him over the year and even in past years, someone who wants to be among the all-time greats, right? He's got kind of Michael Jordan kind of in his sights, like he says, and that's a lofty goal. He's only 3 years in, and Jordan, arguably the best player of all time. But I remember the narrative of him coming out of college was, does he really like basketball all that much? It was just kind of this kind of half baked theories of what he was and who he is. I think we have a pretty good sense right now that he will put in the work. He wants to do the work to be not just a top 20 NBA player, which I think we could say he is right now, or at least very close to that. He wants to be, in that very, very elite group. And it's thinking about where his ceiling is kind of interesting because he's improved, I think, every year, especially I think this past year took a pretty good jump, but kind of thinking about what's next for him. Is that enough? Contested shots and thinking about efficiency, things like that, and end of game stuff. That is where you cement a little bit of your legacy. But what else kind of gets him to that? Kind of helps him keep taking those steps along the way.
There's a little bit of leadership, I think, in there too, and we talked about that. I didn't really get that into the piece, so this is kind of something that part of the conversation that I didn't find room for. But he said he's more confident to speak up. If something's bothering him, he feels more latitude to say so, communicate that to his teammates when it comes to basketball stuff. He said people would be surprised at how much he doesn't talk, because they see kind of like the public perception of him, and you think like, oh, he's a very talkative kind of guy. But right. When it comes to, I guess, more basketball kind of that sort of stuff, he says he tends to not be as talkative. But that, was gradually starting to change as teammates around him are, giving him and encouraging him to say more, say what's on his mind. So that's an ongoing process that, I don't think Michael Jordan was ever shy about telling teammates what was on his mind. So that's one part of it. You just sense being around him late in the season, in the playoffs, like there's a desire to win there that I think is very present in him, and he was very disappointed, upset when they lost in the playoffs. I think 2 first-round exits is already too many for him and wearing on him as a player. He said during that Denver series that he doesn't consider himself a star in the league because he's never been out of the first round of the playoffs. In order for him to kind of take the label of a star, he feels like he has to at least get out of the first round. So I sense that there is a real determination on his part. Over 3 years of covering Ant, he does a really good job of coming off as authentic, of saying a lot of the right things. I think sometimes putting stuff into practice on the court proves to be a more difficult challenge. And it's only natural. He's a young player in the NBA, still learning how to navigate the ins and outs of the league. But I think what you can be encouraged by is his intention, his determination, and the fact that even though he may say certain things, he's going to improve and work on certain things, it doesn't always happen overnight, but it happens gradually. And I think you could see that growth in him throughout 3 seasons. The growth has been gradual, and every year he has improved. And we'll see what year 4 has to bring.
I think one thing, too, that he can do, and I think he would probably say this, maybe did say this, something Chris Finch, head coach, has talked about, is sometimes when they get in those situations, whether I think they blew counting the play-in and counting that last playoff game, I think they lost 20 leads of double digits or more this year and ended up losing those games. And I think sometimes in those sequences, and I think you saw it at the end of game 4, even when they managed to win still, he tries to be the hero sometimes and tries to get like the 5-point shot or tries to like end the run. Like right here, we're going to, takes a shot with like 17 seconds left on the shot clock that you can get with 4 seconds left in the shot clock, things like that. I think that's part of the on-court maturity too, like kind of understanding when to go, when do you need to get kind of your best shot versus trying to like hurry and try to end this run and getting a run stopped and getting the momentum turned through patience rather than urgency sometimes, I think is something he could learn as well.
Well, that's their biggest problem just as a team overall is
Yeah.
how do you navigate these final minutes of a game. And I sensed in our interview that he you know he feels like I put it on me. I could take the blame myself if things go wrong. Now, whether or not that's the best tactic that they could employ, I'm not sure. Having the ball in his hands is the best tactic. Absolutely, because you want to make sure the defense is coming over to him. But him always maybe trying to force up a shot, I don't know that's always that should be just their offense
Right.
late in game situations. So, like I said, we'll see how this plays out when it actually comes about next October. But late game situations, they gotta come up with something better, and maybe with cohesion, this group having a little more time together, this starting unit that only played, I don't know, what was it, a dozen games together, so 15 games, whatever the number was, where everybody was actually available.
Right.
Probably less than that, considering McDaniels was out for the playoffs.
Right.
So this group that has only played 10-ish games together, with a training camp and with more time in the early part of a regular season to try and figure stuff out when it comes to that part of a game.
Yeah. No, that I mean, it makes sense. It's just it is a hurdle for them to climb. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about kind of some of the dynamics too between Ant and Karl Anthony Towns. And Towns was on a podcast, like it was last week, with Paul George that was fairly interesting in a lot of regards. He talked about kind of the same things that Ant was saying. Like he feels like the season, was a failure to a certain degree because they didn't get out of the first round. That was his minimum expectation, was that they would go to at least the second round and have a competitive second round series. And they certainly came up short of that. But just kind of you sense the pecking order changing here. And maybe some of that happened because Towns was out for so long this season. But you kind of sense, remember when Gerson Rosas got here, and all of a sudden it went from talk of Towns and Wiggins to Towns. And they kind of like, Wiggins was no longer this foundational piece. And I don't think they're there. I think they're still talking about Towns and Ant as kind of their foundational pieces, even if I'm not convinced Towns will be here for the long haul. But how do you think that dynamic works, either from the top down, from the organizational structure, and also, between Ant, Towns, and even Gobert, in terms of kind of pecking order? And that sorts itself out with last shot time, sorts itself out with kind of who's going to be the vocal leader, things like that.
Well, I mean, I feel like when they made the trade for Rudy, it was, and you trade away all those draft picks, it's not a move that signals Ant is the organizational number one. It's either a tie with Karl, or Karl was still ahead at that moment in time, because that's a move done. They'll argue that it was done to raise the floor of the team, and it helps the younger guys get playoff experience, but that's a move done to win now, to maximize the window of Karl Anthony Towns being in his now kind of late 20s, where he's right in his physical peak as an NBA player. So I think when you zoom out and just look, like, what has this organization done? Like, Karl is still very much either tied for number one or number one when it comes to that sort of mindset of the team. You don't make that move unless you're trying to maximize what Karl Anthony Towns has to give you. Ant is the future. Tim Connolly said they need to make every move going forward with him in mind. But again, I point to the one big move that they made, and I'm not sure that was 100% with just Ant in mind. So it's a tricky dynamic, a tricky balance. I do think that, at least having having a playoff roster is going to be beneficial to Ant, to Jaden, even though Jaden wasn't in the playoffs this year. I think that can only help them from that perspective. You just wonder, did they, have they sacrificed too many assets to, be detrimental to that younger core of Ant and Jaden, that timeline? You gave up a little bit of your ability to be super competitive with that timeline to be more competitive now. Ultimately. So I still think Cat is still very high on the organizational pecking order. But this year is a huge year for everything. Everything has to come together this year, or else come next summer we could be talking about major changes because of all the money that's going to be coming on the books. So ask me that a year from now and we'll see where we're at.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us want those answers sooner, but you're right. I think maybe they're looking at it with a slightly, medium-term view right now. Now, all that said, circling back on the Gobert trade, Towns on that podcast I referenced, and I've talked about this a couple times on this show already, said that he was surprised by the Gobert trade, that it took him by surprise, essentially, and that he had to, relearn or learn on the fly that he was going to be the 4, not the 5 this year, and that he took it as a challenge. He didn't, he wasn't, I don't think he was overly negative about it, but I think the fact that he said it was a surprise to him caught me a little bit by surprise. And, we can't escape the shadow of that Gobert trade. I think even over the weekend, statistical guru from 538, Nate Silver, even weighed in and called it the worst trade of all time, just kind of out of nowhere, just dumping sand on everybody. But as you think about that, and kind of that piece of the puzzle, and Towns being surprised by it, what do you make of that? Kind of hearing him say that.
I mean, it kind of is in line with what he said last summer. He said he didn't really have any real inclination it was happening. And I think the line that he said last summer was, somebody said that they traded for Rudy from Utah, and he thought Rudy Gay at first was coming here. That was what he said. I think last summer when we spoke to him. But I do think that, for a long time they were looking for another big man to pair with him. So I don't think that concept should have come as a huge shock to Carl, because that's something that the organization had stated, Finch had talked about prior to the Gobert trade happening, was looking for some sort of front court upgrade, a guy to pair next to Carl. So getting somebody of that could play that position should not have been a surprise. The fact that it was Rudy Gobert and the trade was as massive as it was, I think, was the surprise. So I think that's probably maybe more of what he means. But, I don't think that it should have been a shock that he was going to be playing more of the 4.
Yeah. Finally, let's end on this. A lot of these questions, another question needs to be answered first. Is Tim Connolly going to be here to make these decisions? And we don't have any inclination to believe that he necessarily won't be, but he's not shut the door on, definitively. And he was on, when he talked to reporters a couple weeks ago, and then he was on with Chad Hartman last week. He's been asked multiple times, like, can you definitively say you're going to be here, that you're not interested in that Washington job? And he didn't really shut it down. He could have shut it down in a far more definitive way, and the Wizards still have not hired a new executive, and it's been a few weeks now, right? That happened in the middle of that playoff series,
now.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, it's been over 3 weeks, maybe, or close to 3 weeks at this point, and there haven't really been any rumblings nationally of people that have been reportedly linked to the job. It's everybody, it just seems to be that Connolly's the only one that's linked to it because he interviewed for it before, but
right.
We don't know if they've, any sort of steps have been taken to kind of initiate any talks on that front, and it's been a very quiet process from a national perspective. So
yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I'm trying to imagine, like, you know, organizationally, what if he, just hypothetically, like if he did leave, like what would that signal? Would it be, whoever's coming in and taking charge, whether it's, Gupta again or somebody else, would have a certain amount of decisions to make that are awfully big. But I know a lot of that's getting ahead of ourselves, but I'm just trying to imagine this playing out in certain ways. And what do you what's the best case scenario for them in all this?
If he leaves, or
I just in general, like what do you think they want? I hope they still like him, but after the Gobert trade, I have to imagine
this is an organization that needs continuity of
that's
some
what I
sort.
think in a certain
Like
degree. Yeah.
this there's been too much change with
Yeah.
this franchise throughout its history.
That's kind of what I was
Especially
getting
throughout
at,
its
I think.
recent
Yeah.
history. Yeah, you need stability in leadership, stability in coaching for the people that want to fire Chris Finch. He's the second winningest coach in franchise history.
Yeah.
Because, coaches barely last 2 seasons here in Minnesota. This organization has lacked stability. And how did Tim Connolly develop Denver into what they are now? Organizational stability, the same people in the same spots for years with the same program, the same development plan for young talent. And that's how Denver became who they were. It wasn't just swapping people in and out because you didn't like how they performed for a quarter of the season or half the season. You stuck with them, and now they're in the Western Conference Finals again. So I think that has to be the ultimate goal, is finding some sort of stability within the organization.
The sane voice in the sea of cries, Chris Hine. I know I think everybody wants things faster. They want to accelerate the timeline, but
they want everybody fired and this and that, and yeah. But I just think it's a lot of knee-jerk reaction stuff, and frustration and anger has to go places. So
yeah,
I get it, and the front office is, and the coaching staff are obviously the easiest targets for some of that.
Yeah, and sometimes the players too. But
fire everybody, trade everybody.
It's just that easy. Over. It's just that easy.
Get rid of everybody but Ant and Jaden and start over.
Well, they've started over enough times. I don't think they don't need a complete reboot. But still an interesting off season. No first round pick, but decisions to make going forward, and we'll see what they end up doing in the next month or two, and that could really shape their future. Chris Hine, good stuff as always. Go read his Anthony Edwards story, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and we will talk to you again down the road.
Thank you, Mike.
Postscript to that conversation with Chris Hine was just noticing that Lakers and Nuggets in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals is tonight. Kind of raises some what-ifs for the Timberwolves, right? Because the Lakers had a much easier path than the Wolves. Much better team, I think, right now, obviously with LeBron James and Anthony Davis at full strength and some better supporting cast right now. But the Wolves had beaten the Lakers in that play-in game. They might have had a much more reasonable path in the playoffs, not saying they beat Memphis, not saying they beat Golden State, but a much easier path, as it turns out, than Denver, I think, at the very least. So a what if there had they won that play-in game and been the 7th seed and not had to work to be the 8th seed. The other what if is now that they lost to Denver. That Denver has advanced all the way to the Western Conference Finals, taking care of Phoenix in 6 games. And combined with the Dallas Stars winning on Monday night, finishing off the Seattle Kraken in Game 7, got tense at the end. It was 2-0. It was 1-0 for a long time. Then it was 2-0 Stars. Seattle got one with about 20 seconds left to pull it closer, but could not get the final equalizer in the final second. So Dallas moves on. Dallas and Denver have both moved on, the teams that eliminated the Wild and Wolves respectively. I posed a question on Twitter. Does the fact that they both advanced and are in the conference finals now of the NHL and NBA respectively, does that make you feel better about the Minnesota losses, worse, or you don't care? And, this was posted late at night, but it's got a few hundred votes so far. Most of you don't care. 62% are on the don't care about those teams having success beyond that series with the Wolves and Wild. So good for you. About 30% of you said they makes you feel better about the Minnesota losses. They lost to good teams, and I can respect that. And about 9% of you say you feel worse about the losses. I think most of you who answered this have a disposition to not like Dallas because they stole the North Stars almost 25 years ago, and I get that. I think that's fair. Just food for thought. Just thought it was interesting. Thought I would ask that question. Like, do you still pay attention once the Wild and Wolves lose? Do you care if the team that beat them wins or loses beyond that? Because then it does mean, hey, you were either beaten by a good team or beaten by a team that lost right away. And it seems like a lot of you either don't care or it does make you feel a little bit better about those Minnesota teams. Let's finish with the cooler, by the way. Just a final thought about Za'Darius Smith. Now he's been traded to the Browns. Just interesting in this salary cap era, right? A guy who was instrumental in the Vikings' early season success, at least. He had like 8.5 sacks in their first 7 games. Didn't do much over the final 10. I think it was just like 1.5 sacks as he kind of battled through some knee issues, stuff like that. But a guy who had 10 sacks for a team that won 13 games, and people just couldn't wait to see Za'Darius Smith out the door. It was, in this salary cap era, as some people look more at cap numbers sometimes than they do productivity, than they do at production. And I think we all knew this was going to happen at some point, especially when the Vikings signed Marcus Davenport, and they already have Daniil Hunter, of course. But just interesting to me, this happens in every sport, not just football, but it seems like a football special problem too. This is one that happens in football maybe more than other sports, where the cap is so fixed. You have to be under the cap, and you have to kind of move on from players. And I just feel like, Za'Darius Smith's a good player. In a different era without a salary cap, people would have been clamoring to keep him, to have him around for another year. Instead, it seems like it's more of a good riddance. So again, just food for thought, just kind of the modern era of sports, how things work in a salary cap sport. That will do it for me today. Should be a bunch of good stuff coming up tomorrow. Hoping to get some Gophers softball content on the show later this week. Hoping to get some outdoors content as well, and maybe a special appearance from local NFL writer Matthew Collar. So that is all coming up later this week. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Sunshine, beautiful day. Go get out there. Listen to this podcast outside whenever you can this summer and this spring, because these are the days, like I always tell my kids, that we wait for all winter long. Again, Michael Rand. Talk to you again tomorrow.